There is a specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. I learned that the winter I was 23, standing in my own kitchen with a pot of soup going lukewarm on the stove, watching my husband eat his supper 3 feet away from me, as though I were a piece of furniture he had grown used to stepping around. Nobody had shouted, nobody had slammed a door, and yet the room felt colder than any January wind I had ever walked through. What I did not understand yet was that this coldness was not an accident. It was a lesson, and every Amish wife around me had been quietly taught how to survive it. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 19, I left at 27, and on this channel I finally say the things I was taught to keep behind closed doors. Today I want to talk about something almost nobody outside our world understands, and something almost every woman inside it recognizes the moment I describe it. The coldness. The particular, deliberate withdrawal a husband uses instead of an argument, and the specific things women are quietly taught to do when it arrives. I want to start by explaining what I mean, because the word coldness can sound abstract if you have never lived inside it. In my marriage, and in the marriages of nearly every woman I knew, disagreements rarely turned into shouting matches. Amish culture does not reward loud conflict. It rewards restraint, patience, the appearance of peace at almost any cost. So when a husband was unhappy, especially with his wife, he very rarely said so directly. Instead, something in the house simply changed temperature. Conversation became shorter. Eye contact disappeared. Meals were eaten in silence that had teeth in it. A husband might still speak to the children, still nod at his mother, still greet neighbors warmly at church, and somehow, in the middle of all that ordinary warmth, his wife would find herself standing alone in a room that had gone cold around her specifically. The first time I experienced it fully, I did not even know it was happening. I only knew that something had shifted after I mentioned, gently, that I was too tired to attend a quilting circle 3 evenings in a row. Jonas did not argue. He simply grew quieter. By the second day, he was answering my questions in single words. By the third day, he was barely answering at all. I remember standing at the stove that week, stirring supper, feeling something heavy settle into my chest that I could not name yet. I only knew that whatever I had done, it required fixing, and that the fixing was entirely my responsibility. That is the first lesson every Amish wife learns, whether anyone says it out loud or not. When the coldness comes, it is yours to solve. Nobody hands you a manual. Nobody sits you down and explains the rules. You learn them the way you learn everything else in that world, by watching the women around you, by noticing what worked for your mother, your aunts, your mother-in-law, the older women at church who seemed, on the surface, to have peaceful marriages. I remember watching my own mother during moments like this when I was a girl, though I did not understand what I was seeing until years later. She would become unusually attentive during those cold stretches. She would prepare my father's favorite meals without being asked. She would find small, quiet ways to be near him, refilling his coffee, mending a shirt that did not desperately need mending, asking about his day in a softer voice than usual. At the time, I thought this was simply what a good wife did, an expression of love and attentiveness. Now I understand it differently. I understand it as a survival strategy, one she had learned from her own mother, who had learned it from hers. When the coldness came into my own marriage, an older woman in our district, a woman I trusted, once explained the pattern to me plainly, the way older Amish women sometimes do when they decide a younger woman needs to understand something quickly. She said that a wife has 3 tools when her husband turns cold: patience, usefulness, and silence. Patience, because the coldness would eventually pass, and rushing it or questioning it directly only extended it. Usefulness, because a husband's disappointment softened faster when he could see, plainly, that his wife was working hard, managing the household well, meeting every practical need without complaint. And silence, because words, especially questions, especially anything that sounded like confrontation, were understood to make things worse, not better. I followed all three. For years, I followed all three. And I want to be honest that in the short term, they worked. The coldness would lift, usually within a week, sometimes faster if I was especially attentive. Jonas would begin speaking to me normally again. He would smile at supper. He might even apologize in his own indirect way, mentioning that he had been working hard, that the season had been difficult, that he appreciated everything I did. And every time that warmth returned, I felt something like relief so powerful it almost erased the memory of the cold week that came before it. That relief, I understand now, is part of what kept the pattern alive. Because when warmth returns after a period of deliberate withdrawal, it does not feel ordinary. It feels earned. It feels like something you fought for and won. And a woman who believes she has earned her husband's warmth through patience and effort is far less likely to question why the coldness arrived in the first place, or whether it was ever really about anything she had done wrong. I did not have the language for any of this while I was living inside it. I only have the felt experience, week after week, year after year, of learning to read temperature the way other people read weather. I could tell, within moments of walking into a room, whether the air was warm or cold that day. I adjusted my voice, my requests, even the way I moved through the house, based on readings I was making constantly and almost unconsciously. There is a woman I think about often from those years, an older neighbor named Fannie, who lived 2 farms over. She had been married almost 40 years, and people spoke of her marriage with real admiration. Fannie and her husband seemed steady, calm, devoted. One afternoon, while we were canning peaches together, she told me something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. She said that in the early years of her marriage, she used to believe the coldness meant something was wrong with her. She said it took her nearly a decade to realize the coldness had very little to do with her at all, and everything to do with a system that had taught her husband that withdrawal was safer, more acceptable, more godly than simply saying, "I am upset, and here is why." She told me that once she understood that, something shifted for her, though not in the way you might expect. She did not leave. She did not confront him directly, not in the way outsiders might imagine. Instead, she said she simply stopped believing the coldness was a referendum on her worth. She still moved through those cold weeks with patience, usefulness, and silence, because that was still the world she lived in and the tools available to her. But she said something inside her had separated from the belief that she deserved it. And that separation, small as it sounds, changed the way the coldness felt, even when she could not change the fact that it kept happening. I have thought about Fannie's words more times than I can count since I left. Because what she described is, I think, exactly what many Amish women learn to do. Not to escape the coldness, because escape was rarely available to them, but to survive it with some piece of themselves intact. To do the patient, useful, silent things the culture required, while quietly, privately, refusing to let those requirements define their sense of self-worth. I did not manage that separation while I was still married. I believed, fully and completely, that the coldness was a mirror held up to my failures. If Jonas grew distant, I searched my last few days of behavior for the offense. Had I spoken too sharply to one of the children? Had I spent too long at my mother's? Had I forgotten to mend something, prepare something, anticipate something he needed before he needed it? I became, over the years, an expert at self-examination, constantly auditing myself for the crime that had caused the weather to change. It was only much later, after I left, after months of therapy with a counselor who specialized in women leaving high-control religious communities, that I began to understand what had actually been happening. She used a term I had never heard before: emotional withdrawal as control. She explained that in many relationships, especially ones shaped by rigid hierarchy, withdrawal functions exactly like punishment, even when no one calls it that. It teaches the person on the receiving end to constantly monitor their own behavior, to become hypervigilant, to prioritize the other person's comfort above their own needs, all without a single raised voice or explicit threat. She told me something that reframed years of my life in a single sentence. She said, "The absence of shouting does not mean the absence of control. Sometimes, silence is the loudest tool in the room." I think about all the women I grew up around who lived inside that particular weather system, moving from warmth to cold and back again, developing incredible skill at reading a husband's mood, incredible patience for absorbing blame that was never fully theirs to carry. I do not believe most of those husbands, including my own, sat down and consciously decided to punish their wives with silence. I believe, the same way I believe about so much of what happened in that world, that they were following a script handed to them, one that told them withdrawal was strength, that anger expressed loudly was weakness, and that a wife's job was to notice, adjust, and restore the peace. But scripts, even inherited ones, even well-intentioned ones, still have consequences for the people living inside them. And the consequence, for me and for so many women I knew, was years spent believing that our worth rose and fell with someone else's temperature, that our job was to read the cold and warm ourselves back into favor. If you grew up learning to read a room before you learned to trust your own feelings in it, I see you. If you spent years believing that someone else's silence was proof of your failure, I see you. You were not imagining it. You were not oversensitive. You were living inside a system that taught the people around you that withdrawal was safer than honesty, and taught you that surviving it quietly was the same thing as being a good wife. It never was. It was simply what you were given to work with, and you did the best you could with it. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.